The legalization of marijuana for recreational use faces a new hurdle from the federal government. U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions recently withdrew an earlier guidance that calls for avoiding conflict with marijuana sales legally regulated by states. The decision has prompted advocates of legalization to voice concerns. To explain is our guest from the group backing legalization in Massachusetts, Yes on 4. We'd like to welcome the Communications Director, Jim Borghesani. Thank you very much for being with us, Jim.
Thank you, Chris.
It's not a surprise that Jeff Sessions doesn't like legal marijuana, but as far as this move here to change the policy of the federal government, how has it affected what's happening in Massachusetts so far?
Well, I would say that it's rhetoric with the potential of impact. At this point, it has thrown a lot of doubt into what's going to happen when the market goes legal and when sales become legal in July. The U.S. Attorney in Massachusetts hasn't said that he's going to start arresting people, but he hasn't said that he's not either. So there's a vacuum now. What the Cole Memorandum did under the Obama administration was give guidance to U.S. attorneys about how to take a non-interference approach to a situation that was kind of odd, something illegal at the federal level, legal at the state level. It worked. We saw legal markets go into place in 4 states, starting with Colorado, and the U.S. Department of Justice lived with that legal market, and they began to generate extensive revenue for the towns and the state, and it started to knock out the black market. Everything was going great. Now we have this period of uncertainty. The Cole memo was no longer there. There's a vacuum of guidance. So it's going to be a wait and see sort of situation where we see what U.S. attorneys at the local level are going to do.
When I look at some of the statements coming from the Justice Department here, I see this, laying open the possibility of conflict with state regulation. But on the other hand, I see their aims. They're talking about things like going after money laundering and violence. And it sounds like, well, that's not happening with regulated markets. So what are you worried about?
You're exactly right. Unfortunately, a lot of the regulated markets, they have trouble getting access to banking because of federal laws. Banks don't want to lose their charters under the federal system. We have movement on Capitol Hill to ease that access to banking. And I think it's worthy to note that when Jeff Sessions made his announcement, nobody supported it. No Republican senators, certainly no Democratic senators. It was met with either silence or condemnation. There are several Republican senators who are very angry about this, including Cory Gardner in Colorado. So I didn't see the White House say, this is what we want from the DOJ, this is what we want our policy to be. The White House hasn't even commented on this, other than some comments from Sarah Huckabee Sanders, but Donald Trump himself has said nothing.
Well, another possibility here is that Congress, with maybe people from both parties, could take the initiative and just clear up the picture on this. Couldn't they do that?
They could do that. They could take it out of right now it's a Schedule I substance. It's right there with heroin and OxyContin as a deadly substance, which is ridiculous. People were hoping that the DEA would reclassify it last summer. It didn't happen. It still can happen. We're seeing Canada this year, the entire country, go legal with cannabis. They're not doing it in the patchwork approach like the United States is. That's where we have this problem. You have a problem when you have, in Colorado, for instance, some counties being legal, some counties where it's not legal. Certainly states next to other states that are illegal and legal, and legal at the federal level, illegal at the federal level, legal at the state level. It's sort of a crazy way to approach this, especially when we're seeing that 64% of Americans say it should be legalized, 51% of Republicans saying it should be legalized. That's up 9 points just from last year. We're seeing momentum on the legalization side.
Well, my quick profile of support for legalization is that it's more blue than red. But on the other hand, if you look at some of the groups that's supporting it, about the American Legion, I think?
American Legion, because of evidence that it's helping post-traumatic stress disorder. It's helping veterans with some of their symptoms. We're looking at the Koch brothers, for instance, saying that they take a libertarian approach, that it should be legal. We see some of Donald Trump's advisors, like Roger Stone, big Republican, advisor and player for many decades, saying it should be legal. This is ridiculous. So, I mean, in the best case scenario, this is the last gasp, if you will, of prohibitionists, you know. Worst case scenario, we're going to see U.S. attorneys start to prosecute businesses that are legally operating under a state license, like what should happen in Massachusetts, and I hope does. And that's going to create, you know, just a huge level of uncertainty, especially for investors who say, we want to, you know, get into this new industry, but now, why would we want to risk our investment?
This is BNN News, and we're talking about legal marijuana and federal enforcement with Jim Borghesani from Yes on 4. Jim, in the worst case here is that this could scare off a regulated market, and then I guess what? You'd have more people buying it underground, right?
You have people buying it the way they always have been, from illegal sellers in illegal markets with dangerous product, probably untested. You don't know, when you bet street level marijuana, you don't know who grew it. You don't know what's in it. You have an inherently dangerous market. You have a consumer transaction that is not the same type as an alcohol transaction where you go into a licensed seller that checks IDs, that has products with a label on it that tells you exactly what's in it. That's the way it should be for cannabis. You know, it's not like advocates are saying we want cannabis to be in the market. It's already there. All we're saying is let's shift the commerce away from criminals and into businesses, again, that check IDs, that pay taxes, that generate significant new streams of revenue for towns and the state. We're not introducing anything to the market that doesn't already exist. So what you just said is exactly what will happen. They'll continue to go to the black market. We'll continue to see gangs and cartels control this system of commerce. We're trying to break their stranglehold on this. It's been like this for decades. It's time to put it the way the American people want it, 64% saying it should be legal. Prohibition should be abolished. So, you know, it makes no sense on any level. Public safety, certainly not. Criminal justice, certainly not. And it's on the wrong side of history.
Is there any chance that you can really prove that having legal sales really displaces the imported product and anything that goes with that?
Yes. Yes, we've seen a significant reduction in marijuana being transported across from Mexico just since Colorado and Washington and Oregon and Alaska have gone legal. Significant reduction in that. We've seen a significant reduction in arrests for production and sales in those states. It's interesting in Colorado, if you look at the number of arrests, they are way down in towns and counties that have legal marijuana. They're still high, pardon the pun, in towns and counties that don't have legality. So what we're seeing is that the black market is thriving where the legal market hasn't gotten the foothold yet. So there's no doubt that this is knocking illegal dealers out of business, just like it did when alcohol prohibition ended. It didn't happen overnight, but everybody started to buy eventually from safe sellers that had, tested product, and nobody was buying from, the bathtub gin producers because they couldn't compete. It wasn't safe, and it was illegal. That transaction was illegal. What right-thinking person would say, I want to continue an illegal transaction when I can go and just take a legal transaction and not worry about anything?
When we were voting on this referendum, of course, part of the debate was about social justice, is that we don't want to be cracking down on small-time users or even small-time distributors. But does this act of the federal government right now, what Sessions is doing, does that really make much difference now as far as social justice, since it seems to be mainly about the companies that are going to be producing this?
Yeah, I don't see the feds going after a small-time user. I don't see the feds going after a small-time dealer, even if they don't even allow cultivators or legal businesses to get established. They never have gone after the small-time people. The federal government usually goes after large-scale trafficking cases. That's what they do. They leave the smaller cases to the local law enforcement agencies. So, what this is doing is saying the federal government potentially could move in markets where they basically haven't been before, and it's just, it's, we were hoping that the U.S. Attorney would give more clarity to what he intends to do on this. Unfortunately, he has not done that.
Well, what about that? Because you need something in the short term, no matter what happens eventually with Congress or the president. I mean, what has to happen pretty soon?
I think we need guidance from the U.S. attorneys, each U.S. attorney in every legal state saying, look, this is what we're going to do. We are not going to prosecute somebody who gets a license from, in Massachusetts' case, the Cannabis Control Commission. They grant somebody a license, says you now have the license to manufacture cannabis. It would be nice to hear the U.S. Attorney say, I recognize what the voters did in November 2016. I'm not going to take any steps to prosecute somebody who's operating lawfully with a permit or a license granted by the Cannabis Control Commission. That would be very helpful. That's what I think we need. There's a vacuum now. The Cole Memorandum being scuttled by Jeff Sessions has created a vacuum. We have to fill that with guidance at this point now from each U.S. attorney in the legal states.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris.
From Yes on 4, Jim Borghesani.